It's 11 p.m. You're lying in bed, finally still after a long day. And then, completely unprompted, your brain hands you a gift you never asked for. The exact memory of something you said in a meeting 3 years ago. Or the time you waved back at someone who wasn't waving at you. Your face gets hot. Your stomach drops. You physically cringe, alone, in the dark, over something nobody else on earth remembers. Why does this happen? And why does it always seem to happen at night, right when you finally have a moment of peace? It turns out this isn't a glitch. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a very specific, very well-documented psychological process. And once you understand the mechanics behind it, it becomes a lot less mysterious, and honestly, a lot less personal. To understand why this happens at night specifically, you need to understand two parts of your brain that are constantly negotiating with each other throughout the day. The first is your prefrontal cortex, the logical, executive part of your brain responsible for reasoning, focus, and impulse control. Think of it as the brain's manager. All day long, it's filtering out distractions, keeping you on task, and quietly suppressing thoughts that aren't useful in the moment. If an embarrassing memory tries to surface while you're driving or in a meeting, your prefrontal cortex is usually strong enough to shove it back down before it fully registers. The second is your amygdala, the older, more primitive part of your brain responsible for processing fear and emotionally charged memories. The amygdala doesn't reason. It doesn't care about context or time. It just flags things as important based on how emotionally intense they felt, and it holds onto those flags for a very long time. During the day, the manager keeps the amygdala in check. But at night, as your body winds down and prepares for sleep, that executive control weakens. Sleep researchers have found that during nighttime awakening specifically, the prefrontal cortex becomes measurably less active, which means you lose much of the filtering system that normally keeps those old memories locked in a drawer. The amygdala, meanwhile, doesn't power down at the same rate. So for a window of time, right before sleep, you're left with all of the emotional intensity of an old memory and almost none of the rational perspective that would normally put it in its place. That's the setup. But it doesn't fully explain why it's specifically the embarrassing memories that come knocking. Here's where it gets interesting. Embarrassment isn't just an unpleasant feeling. Evolutionarily speaking, it's a warning system. Humans are, and have always been, deeply social animals. For most of our history, being cast out of a group wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was a genuine survival threat. So your brain evolved to treat social mistakes as high-priority information. When you say something awkward or make a public misstep, your brain tags that moment as important, in exactly the same category as physical danger, because for most of human history, damaging your social standing really could get you killed. This is why an embarrassing memory from 5 years ago can still trigger a real physical reaction today. A flush of heat, a knot in your stomach, an actual adrenaline response. Your body isn't overreacting. It's responding the way it was built to respond to a threat to your social survival. Even though the threat happened years ago, and probably nobody else even remembers it. There's also a well-documented psychological effect at play here called the spotlight effect. Our tendency to dramatically overestimate how much other people notice and remember our mistakes. If you tripped in public, it feels, in the moment, like everyone saw it and everyone's still thinking about it. In reality, most people forgot within minutes, because they were far more focused on their own lives than on yours. But your brain doesn't naturally know that. It just assumes the spotlight was on you, and stores the memory accordingly. Here's the part that makes all of this worse. Trying to suppress the memory often backfires completely. In the 1980s, psychologist Daniel Wegner ran a now famous experiment. He asked participants to spend 5 minutes trying not to think about a white bear. Every time the thought of a white bear crossed their mind, they were told to ring a bell. The result? People who were told not to think about the white bear thought about it far more often than a control group who were given no instructions at all. Wegner called this the ironic process theory. The harder you try to push a thought away, the more your brain keeps checking to make sure it's successfully avoiding it, which means it has to keep the thought active in order to monitor it. The suppression itself becomes the thing keeping the memory alive. This is exactly what happens when you lie in bed trying to force an embarrassing memory out of your head. The effort to not think about it becomes the mechanism that keeps bringing it back. The good news is that this isn't a permanent trap. Researchers have found real, tested ways to weaken these mental loops. One approach, studied in a 2012 paper published in the journal Neuron, used brain imaging to identify two distinct neural strategies people can use to intentionally reduce the pull of unwanted memories, essentially training the brain to engage its rational, contextualizing systems on purpose, rather than passively hoping the memory fades. A separate line of research, out of Stanford, tested a much simpler technique. Participants were asked to either recall their most embarrassing memory in plain detail, or to rewrite it specifically as a story of growth and learning, reframing what happened as something that taught them a valuable lesson, rather than something that simply humiliated them. A month later, the group who reframed the memory reported significantly fewer intrusive replays of it than the group who simply recalled it. The mechanism is fairly intuitive once you see it laid out. Genuinely old memories, the ones that don't bother you anymore, are ones your brain has successfully filed away with context. This happened a long time ago. It didn't actually damage anything important, and it's over. Fresh, embarrassing memories haven't been given that context yet. Reframing forces your brain to build that context deliberately, instead of waiting for time to do it naturally.